Nobody in that building knew her name. Nobody asked. She was just the woman with the mop, moving quietly through the corridors of the 47th floor while the rest of Chicago slept. But on a Thursday night in November, Maya Donovan did something that would force an entire company to ask a question nobody was prepared to answer. And the answer would change everything. Maya was 36 years old, and she had learned early that the world does not pause for grief. When her husband Daniel died in a car accident on the I-90 bridge 3 years earlier, she had sat in the hospital waiting room for 6 hours before a doctor walked toward her with that specific kind of slow that tells you everything before the words do. She had driven home in the dark, walked into the apartment, and stood in the hallway for a long time because she did not know which direction to move in. Her daughter Chloe was asleep in her room, 4 years old, curled around a stuffed elephant Daniel had bought her at O'Hare Airport on the last trip he ever took. Maya had leaned against the wall and made herself a single promise. She was going to keep standing. Whatever it cost, whatever it looked like from the outside, she was going to keep standing for that little girl. Before Daniel died, Maya had been something else entirely. She had grown up in Columbus, Ohio, the kind of kid who stayed after class not because she was in trouble, but because the teacher had said something about circuit logic that she needed to understand completely before she could let it go. Her father, a shift supervisor at a manufacturing plant outside the city, had called her a natural. Her high school physics teacher had driven her to a state engineering competition in his own car because he said it would be a shame if nobody saw what she could do. By the time Maya finished her electrical engineering degree at Ohio State, she had 3 job offers before graduation. She took the one in Chicago. She took it because it was the furthest she had ever been from home, and because something about that felt important at the time. She had spent 7 years at a mid-size automation firm called Centric Systems, designing thermal load management systems for commercial infrastructure across the Midwest. She had been the kind of engineer that other engineers borrowed documentation from, not because they were lazy, but because hers was simply better. Clear, structured, reliable. She had a reputation on the team for looking at a broken system the way other people look at a lock they are about to pick. Patient, certain. Already halfway to the answer before anyone else had finished reading the error log, then Centrix happened. A senior director named Philip Greer had pushed through a cost reduction modification to a control system Maya had originally designed. She had objected in writing, twice. She had flagged the timing risk in formal documentation with her name on every page. When the modified system failed during a high-stakes client presentation, Greer had moved with the kind of institutional speed that only people with something significant to protect can manage. Reports were revised. Her objection memos disappeared from the internal record. Her name was attached to the failure with a misconduct notation that followed her through every subsequent application like a shadow she could not outrun. 15 months of applying, 15 months of interviews that went warm and then went quiet, 15 months of watching the savings account reach levels that made her chest tighten every time she opened the banking app. She had moved herself and Chloe from their apartment in Lincoln Park to a smaller place in Pilsen where the rent was something she could manage, and the neighbors left her alone. On a Tuesday afternoon when Chloe's winter coat was getting too small and the electricity bill had that pale red stripe across the top, Maya saw the posting for a night cleaning position at a company called Nexon Technologies in the Loop. She applied at 2 in the afternoon and received a call by 4:30. She started the following Monday. Nexon Technologies occupied the top 12 floors of a glass building on Wacker Drive with a view of the Chicago River that on clear days made even the elevator ride feel like something. The company had spent the past 4 years building an artificial intelligence platform called Meridian, an adaptive energy distribution system designed to manage load allocation for large commercial and municipal infrastructure. The contracts already signed were worth north of $280 million. The contracts pending depended entirely on a live demonstration 6 weeks out. Every engineer on the Meridian team knew this. Most of them had not slept properly in weeks. The night Maya first noticed the problem, it was late on a Thursday in November, and the server room on the 47th floor smelled like warm metal and quiet panic. She had been running her standard route through the hallways and the small kitchen off the engineering bay when she passed the server room door and heard it. Not an alarm, something softer, the irregular cycling of cooling fans running at uneven intervals, a mechanical hesitation that had no business being there. The door was slightly open. Through the gap she could see the status board on the far wall, a grid of green and amber indicators with a stubborn cluster of red in the lower left corner. She stood in the doorway with her mop in both hands and looked at that pattern. She knew what it meant. Not the specific system, she had never worked with Meridian, but the shape of the failure, the signature of it. It was the kind of fault that looks like hardware until you realize its logic, the kind that keeps junior engineers awake for days because they are searching in the wrong layer of the stack entirely. She stepped back, pulled the door to its original position, and continued her route. She did not say anything to anyone. There was nobody to say anything to. The engineering team had been on it for 72 hours by then. They were sleeping on office couches and eating takeout containers stacked in the kitchen and filling whiteboards with fault trees that got larger and less useful with every passing hour. Meridian had developed what the team was calling a logic loop in the primary energy distribution module, a recursive failure in which the load balancing algorithm would trigger a safety check that would interrupt the load balancing algorithm, which would trigger the safety check. The loop consumed itself endlessly, and the system could not stabilize. The CTO, a man named Robert Callahan, had brought in 2 outside consultants from a firm in San Francisco. They had reviewed the code base for 18 hours and delivered a recommendation for a full rollback to the previous stable build, a process that would take 3 weeks and kill the demonstration timeline entirely. Robert had rejected the recommendation and sent the consultants home. He was not ready to say the word rollback to James Sutton. Nobody who worked for James Sutton was ever ready to deliver bad news to James Sutton. He had founded Nexon Technologies 9 years ago out of a shared workspace in River North with $40,000 of personal savings and a business plan he had revised so many times the early drafts were unrecognizable. He was 44, focused, and possessed of a patience in high-pressure situations that had a way of making everyone else in the room feel like they were moving too slowly. He had built Nexon on a single operating belief. Real ability announces itself through work. Not resumes, not references, work. He did not know Maya Donovan existed. On Friday night at 11:42, Maya finished the kitchen and the 2 conference rooms on 47 and returned to the server room. The door was closed. She pressed her janitorial badge to the reader, heard the latch release, and walked in. The status board was worse. The red cluster had spread. The fans were louder. She set her cart outside, propped the door open with a rubber wedge, and walked to the secondary diagnostics terminal in the corner, the one the IT team used for monitoring rather than active development. She sat down and began reading logs. She did not rush. She followed the data the way she had always followed data, without forcing it toward a conclusion it had not yet earned. The error timestamps told one story. The resource allocation records told a slightly different one. The gap between them was narrow enough that anyone moving fast would have missed it entirely. But Maya was not moving fast. She had learned in 7 years of systems engineering that the most expensive mistakes are made by people who are certain they already know where the problem is. The fault was not in the primary load balancing module. That was where every engineer on the team had been looking. That was exactly why none of them had found it. The fault was in a secondary optimization routine added to Meridian 8 months earlier, a performance enhancement patch designed to reduce system response latency. Under normal operating conditions, the patch was clean and effective. Under high-load conditions, it introduced a timing conflict with the main module's safety check interval. Two processes stepping on each other at the precise moment the system most needed them to cooperate. The loop was not consuming itself. It was being fed by something no one had thought to examine. Maya understood this with a clarity that felt almost physical. She did not have administrator credentials. She did not touch the production environment. What she did instead was use the diagnostics terminal to write a temporary routing instruction, a manual buffer that rerouted the optimization routine's timing call through a sequence that prevented the conflict. It was not a repair, it was a splint. A structurally sound, precisely placed splint that would hold the system stable until someone with full credentials could perform the actual fix. She typed for 5 minutes. She tested the instruction twice. Then she executed it. The status board changed. The red contracted, amber by amber, until the lower left quadrant was solid green. The fan settled into a smooth, even hum. Maya sat for a moment in the quiet of the server room and listened to the system breathe normally for the first time in 3 days. Then she stood up, pushed the chair back to where she had found it, walked to the door, removed the wedge, and let the latch close behind her. She picked up her cart and continued to the 46th floor. The security camera above the server room door recorded all of it without opinion. Welcome to True Spark Stories, the channel where real ability meets its moment. If you're new here, subscribe now and hit the bell so you never miss a story like this one. And tell us in the comments, where are you watching from tonight? James Sutton arrived at the Nexon Technologies building at 6:10 on Saturday morning, the way he arrived every Saturday, with coffee he had made himself and a mind already 3 problems deep before he reached the elevator. What he found waiting for him was Robert Callahan standing outside his office door with the expression of a man who has seen something he cannot explain and is not entirely comfortable admitting it. The overnight monitoring report showed that the Meridian loop had resolved at 11:47 the previous night. No member of the engineering team had been in the building after 11. No remote access had been logged against the main development environment. The system was not just stable, it was running cleaner than it had run in months. "I have no explanation," Robert said. James looked at him for a long moment. "Get me the camera footage," he said. "All of it. Server room, 47th floor, last night." He watched the recording alone in his office with the door closed and his coffee going cold on the desk beside him. He watched a woman in gray coveralls enter the server room on a cleaning badge. He watched her sit down at the diagnostics terminal. He watched her read. He watched her hands move across the keyboard with a steadiness and economy that he recognized immediately, not because he knew her, but because he had spent 9 years building a company around people who moved through technical problems exactly that way. Without performance, without hesitation, like someone who had already done this 1,000 times and saw no reason to make it look like anything other than what it was. He watched the status board change. He watched her leave. He rewound the footage and watched it again. Then he watched it a 3rd time. He set down his coffee, pressed his intercom, and said 4 words. "Find her. Do it now." The facility manager had Maya Donovan's name, employee number, and home address within 35 minutes. By 9:15 on a Saturday morning, a message had been left on her phone asking her to come in Monday, not for her cleaning shift, but to meet with the executive team. Maya listened to the voicemail twice standing in her kitchen, while Chloe ate cereal at the table behind her. She did not know what it meant. She knew what it could mean, and the two possibilities sat on opposite ends of a very wide spectrum. She set the phone on the counter and stood there for a moment. "Mom," Chloe said, "your face is doing the thinking thing." "I know," Maya said. "Eat your cereal." She showed up Monday in her gray coveralls because she did not own anything else she considered appropriate, and because she had decided somewhere on the Red Line ride downtown that she was not going to perform composure she didn't feel. She had spent 15 months being overlooked. She was not going to walk into this building pretending to be something she wasn't for an audience that had already decided what she was the moment they hired her to clean their floors. James Sutton's office occupied a corner of the 48th floor with glass on two sides and a view of Lake Michigan that on a clear morning like this one made the city look like it had been arranged specifically for the occasion. He was standing when she was shown in. Robert Callahan was seated to his right. Two senior engineers Maya did not recognize were positioned against the back wall. Nobody offered her a seat. Nobody smiled. James looked at her the way he looked at balance sheets when a number didn't belong, directly, without hostility, with the full weight of his attention. "Who authorized your access to that terminal?" he said. "Nobody," Maya said. "My badge opens the server room for cleaning purposes. The terminal wasn't locked. I used what was available." "You interfaced with a live production monitoring configuration," Robert said. His voice was careful, but there was heat underneath it. "On a system with active contracts worth nearly $300 million. I wrote a routing buffer to the secondary optimization module through the diagnostics interface," Maya said. "I didn't touch the production code base. What I did was the equivalent of manually redirecting flow around a blocked valve while the pipe is under pressure. The valve is still blocked. You still need to fix it. But now the floor isn't flooding while you figure out how—" "Silence." Robert opened his mouth. James raised one hand without looking at him, and Robert closed it. James was still watching Maya. Something in his expression had shifted. Not warmth exactly, more like recalibration. The number that didn't belong was not going away. It was getting more interesting. "You're going to explain exactly what you found," he said, "and how you found it." He turned toward the whiteboard on the side wall and held out a marker. Maya looked at the whiteboard. She had not stood at one in front of a room full of engineers in 2 years. She took the marker. Her hand was steadier than she expected. She started at the top, the architecture of Meridian's load-balancing logic as best as she could reconstruct it from the monitoring data she had reviewed Friday night. She drew the primary module. She drew the optimization patch and the point at which it integrated with the main system. She drew the timing intervals, the safety check cycle, and the precise window during high-load conditions in which the two processes collided. She labeled everything with the clarity of someone who had spent 7 years doing this work and never once needed anyone to confirm that she understood it. Nobody in the room made a sound. She drew the buffer sequence she had implemented and explained why it was structurally safe as a temporary measure. She circled the integration point in red and wrote next to it in block letters, "This is where the actual fix lives." When she turned back to face the room, one of the engineers against the back wall, a woman named Dana Price, who was one of the senior members of the Meridian team and had been on the 72-hour rotation, was looking at the whiteboard with an expression Maya recognized. It was the expression of someone seeing the answer to a problem they have been carrying for days. It was equal parts relief and discomfort. "She's right," Dana said. She was not addressing anyone in the room. She was addressing the board. The timing conflict in the secondary routine. We didn't check that layer because the patch was performance only. We assumed it was clean. She paused. "She's right." The room stayed quiet for several seconds. James looked at the board. Then he looked at Maya. "Where did you learn to do this?" "Centric Systems," Maya said. I was lead systems engineer for 7 years, designed thermal load management for commercial facilities across the Midwest. Centrix filed a misconduct notation against you, Robert said carefully. He had run the background check. Of course he had. Yes, Maya said, and now you're cleaning floors. Yes. Another silence. James had not moved from his position beside the window. When he spoke again, his voice was different, still precise, but something underneath it had changed. I want to understand the Centrix situation, he said. So do I, Maya said. I have for 2 years. What followed was not a comfortable conversation. It was a factual one. Maya laid out the timeline, the original system design, her written objections to Philip Greer's modification, the timestamps on her memos, the cascade failure, the investigation, the way the internal records had been revised with enough technical sophistication that you had to know what you were looking for to see the seams. She presented it without emotion, not because she didn't feel any, but because she had learned that emotion was the first thing people used to dismiss a woman in a room full of men who had already made up their minds. She gave them the structure. She gave them the sequence. She let the facts carry the weight. James listened without interrupting. When she finished, he did not offer sympathy. He offered the question she had been waiting 2 years for someone in a position of power to ask. Do you have copies of the original objection memos? Yes, Maya said, on a personal drive at home. He looked at Robert. Then he looked back at Maya. It took him 4 seconds to make a decision that most people in his position would have spent a month avoiding. I want to see them, he said. If you're still watching up to now, type "I'm still here" in the comments section and tell us what you think is going to happen next. Because what James Sutton did next would send a tremor through every floor of that building and beyond. 2 days later, he assembled the full Meridian team in the main development lab on the 47th floor. 14 engineers, 2 project managers, Robert and Maya, who arrived again in her gray coveralls because nobody had told her otherwise, and she had decided to stop waiting for permission to simply be exactly who she was. James stood at the front of the room and said without preamble, Meridian needs a permanent fix implemented before the demonstration timeline. I want to see it done in a live environment, today. He looked at Maya. You have the floor. The room understood what this was. It was not a courtesy, it was not a formality. It was a test with real consequences on a live production system in front of the entire team with 6 weeks until the most important demonstration in the company's history. Maya stood at the primary development workstation. She was still in her gray coveralls. She looked at the screen for a long moment, and in that moment she thought about Chloe, about the Tuesday night 3 weeks earlier, when Chloe had been sitting on the bathroom counter watching Maya braid her hair before bed, and had said out of nowhere, Mom, I think you're the smartest person I know. And Maya had said, You don't know that many people yet, baby. And Chloe had said, I know enough. She pulled up the Meridian code base. She went directly to the optimization patch. She pulled it into a side-by-side view with the primary load balancing module and traced the timing architecture forward from the integration point. The fault was there, 3 levels deep inside a conditional loop that only triggered during peak load simulation. She found it in 8 minutes. The permanent fix required inserting a state synchronization checkpoint at the integration point, a 10-line change to the routing logic that allowed both processes to confirm their readiness state before proceeding. She wrote it cleanly. She documented every line as she went, not because anyone asked her to, but because that was how she had always worked. Because documentation was the difference between a fix and a lesson. And Maya Donovan had always been interested in leaving lessons behind her. She ran the static analysis. She ran the load simulation at 40%, then 60, then 80, then full capacity. The Meridian system ran, not just stably, better than it had run at any point in the previous 9 months, because the timing conflict she had corrected had also been introducing a low-level inefficiency into the load balancing cycle under normal conditions. With the synchronization checkpoint in place, the system's response latency dropped by 12%. Maya took her hands off the keyboard and stepped back. Nobody spoke for a moment that lasted long enough to be felt by everyone in the room. Dana Price said quietly, 12% latency reduction. That's going to show in the demo metrics. She said it the way engineers say things when the numbers are doing the talking and there is nothing useful to add. Robert Callahan was looking at the performance readout with an expression that had traveled past discomfort and arrived somewhere closer to reckoning. He had been the one who wanted Maya removed from the building the morning she was brought in. He was not someone who apologized easily, but he understood data, and the data in front of him did not support the position he had been defending. James was standing at the side of the room. He had not moved during the entire demonstration. Now he walked to the center workstation, looked at the performance monitor for a long, quiet moment, and then turned to Maya. "Come to my office," he said. The offer was already written when they sat down. James Sutton did not believe in letting clarity wait for paperwork to catch up. The document on his desk described a position. Senior Systems Architect, Meridian Division. Base compensation 11 times her current cleaning salary. Full benefits. Equity participation, direct reporting line to his office. Maya read it twice. Then she set it on the desk and looked at him. "I want the Centrix record reviewed," she said. "Formally. I want the misconduct notation challenged through the proper channels." James had anticipated this. He had spent part of the previous evening on the phone with Nexon's legal counsel going over the specific protocols governing professional misconduct notations in the engineering sector under Illinois employment law. "I have a legal team," he said. "If your documentation supports the timeline you described, we can initiate a formal challenge. It will take time. It may not be straightforward." "I know," Maya said. "I've been waiting 2 years for someone with the resources to actually look at the documents. That's all I'm asking. Not to fix it for me. Just to look at it, to acknowledge it's worth looking at." James was quiet for a moment. He had built a company on the belief that real ability announces itself through work. The woman sitting across from him had walked into a broken system with a cleaning badge and a mop, and had done in one night what a full engineering team and 2 outside consultants had failed to do in 72 hours. He had watched her do it on a security recording 3 times before he even knew her name. He was not a man who needed more data than that. "My legal team will have your documentation reviewed within 30 days, he said, "if your account is corroborated by the record. Nexon will provide formal documentation of the timeline discrepancy to the Illinois Department of Professional Regulation and the relevant engineering licensing board. That documentation carries institutional weight." Maya looked at him for a moment. Then she picked up the pen. What followed was not a movie. It was a life. And lives move differently than movies do. They move in increments, in early mornings and long afternoons and small daily acts of competence that accumulate quietly until one day you look up and the landscape has changed entirely. Maya stepped into the Meridian architect role the same week the engineering team began integrating her permanent fix into the platform's core architecture. She worked in the same building she had cleaned, on the same floor where someone had once told her with practiced indifference that the server room was not her concern. She wore different clothes now. She still knew exactly where the mop closet was, and she had never once considered that something to be ashamed of. The Centrix review took 4 months. Nexon's legal team was thorough in the way that well-resourced legal teams are thorough, which is to say, they were slow and methodical, and they found things that a person working alone with a personal hard drive and a lot of sleepless nights could never have surfaced on their own. Philip Greer's revision of the internal reports had been done with enough technical sophistication to require expert forensic analysis to unravel properly. But the time-stamp discrepancies Maya had identified were real. The metadata on her original objection memos was intact and unaltered. The document trail, reconstructed in full, told a story that was unambiguous to anyone with the technical expertise to read it. The Illinois Engineering Licensing Board received Nexon's documentation in late April. The formal review process that followed was institutional and deliberate and generated no headlines and very little drama. What it produced was a correction notice. The misconduct notation in Maya Donovan's professional record was reclassified as unsubstantiated and removed. Philip Greer, whose conduct during the original Centrix investigation was found to have materially violated the company's own internal ethics protocol, resigned from his current position at a firm in Cincinnati before the board completed its review. The resignation was noted in a 3-sentence item in an industry newsletter that most people in the field read on their phones and forgot by lunch. Maya read it on a Wednesday morning at her desk on the 47th floor and sat with it for a few minutes. She had imagined this moment many times during the long months of apartment hunting and job applications and final notice envelopes. She had imagined it would feel like something being released, like pressure dropping, like a door finally opening onto a room that had been locked for 2 years. What she actually felt was quieter than that. Not triumph, not the bright, clean burst of vindication she had constructed in her mind, something more structural, more durable. The record now said what was true. After 2 years of carrying a lie attached to her name, the record now said what was true. She sat with that for a few minutes, and then she went back to work. Because there was work to do, and she had always been someone who went back to work. The Meridian live demonstration happened on a Wednesday afternoon in early May in a conference room on the 48th floor with 14 representatives from 5 municipal infrastructure clients and 2 journalists from industry publications seated along the back wall. The system performed at 106% of its projected baseline. The 12% latency improvement Maya's fix had introduced was presented not as a correction but as a feature enhancement, which technically it was. 4 of the 5 clients signed letters of intent before the end of the business day. James shook hands with each of them. He was composed and precise and said exactly what needed to be said and nothing more. After the last client had left and the catering staff was clearing the conference table, he walked past Maya's chair on his way out and paused. He did not stop walking entirely, but he paused. "The numbers held," he said. He kept walking. Maya watched him go. From James Sutton she had learned in 5 months of daily professional proximity that was the equivalent of a standing ovation. She accepted it as such. Maya saw him from across the room. She had become over 5 months of daily proximity reasonably skilled at reading James Sutton's reactions, at distinguishing his analytical stillness from his decisive stillness, his critical attention from his provisional approval. She had learned his registers the way you learn the sounds a building makes, not all at once but gradually, until you can tell the difference between the ones that mean nothing and the ones that mean something. What she saw on his face in the doorway looking at Chloe was none of those registers. It was simpler than any of them, less guarded. He was looking at a 7-year-old girl sitting in a chair eating a granola bar with her ankles crossed and her backpack on, and he had an expression that had nothing professional in it at all. It was the expression of a person who has spent a very long time moving very fast and has just encountered something that made him stop without planning to. He walked into the office. He crouched down to Chloe's level with the unself-conscious ease of someone who is not thinking about how it looks. "You must be Chloe," he said. Chloe looked at him with the clear, measuring attention she gave to everything new. "You're the boss," she said. "I am," James said. "Mom told me about you," Chloe said. James glanced briefly at Maya, who had the expression of a person actively not smiling and succeeding only partially. "She said you're good at your job," Chloe said. She said it the way she said most things, as a fact being reported rather than a compliment being offered. James looked at Chloe for a moment. "Your mom is very good at her job," he said. Chloe considered this with the patience of someone allowing an obvious point to be confirmed by someone who has only just caught up to it. "I know," she said. "I told her that when she was still cleaning floors. She didn't believe me then either." The room went quiet in the specific way rooms go quiet when a child has said something that lands harder than anything an adult has said all day. James stayed crouched for a moment longer than the conversation required. Then he straightened and looked at Maya, and this time the expression was something she did not have a category for yet. It was not professional assessment. It was not the focused analytical attention she had come to associate with him. It was quieter than that, and less constructed, and it stayed on his face for 2 or 3 seconds longer than efficiency had any use for. He said, "Good work this week," and walked out. Maya watched him go. Then she looked at Chloe. Chloe was finishing her granola bar with the composure of someone who has made her point and is content to let the world arrange itself accordingly. On the last Friday of that month, after the building had emptied and the floor had gone quiet, Maya walked through the 47th floor corridor on her way to the elevator. She passed the server room. Through the small window in the door, the status board was solid green, a color that had been anything but simple or guaranteed the first night she had seen it blinking red through a gap in a door, with a mop in her hand and a daughter at home who needed her to keep standing upright. She still had the gray coveralls. She had folded them and placed them on the shelf in the back of her closet, where she could find them without looking. She was not entirely sure why she had kept them. She had thought about it a few times the way you think about things that carry more weight than their physical form explains. She thought it had something to do with what Chloe had said on the Tuesday after the demonstration, sitting across from her at the kitchen table in the apartment they had not yet moved out of, eating dinner with the television off because Maya had a rule about that. "Mom," Chloe had said, "I want to see where you work now. Not your new job, not the office, where you work now." As if the location of Maya's working had become a landmark worth orienting toward, a place worth knowing, a place that meant something about who her mother actually was. Maya stood in the hallway and looked at the green board through the server room window, and felt none of the things she had expected to feel when she imagined a moment like this one during the long months of orange envelopes and silent callbacks and 2 small winter coats. She felt something that did not have a clean name, but that was closest, she thought, to the word restored. The same word she would have used for the system on the other side of that door. Not returned to what it had been before the fault, but corrected. Rebuilt with the hidden conflict found and named and resolved, running now with an honesty it had not had before. She pressed the elevator button and waited. Through the lobby glass below, Chicago was doing what it always did at the end of a Friday evening, dispersing and regrouping, sending its people home through the amber light of rush hour and the blue that comes just after. She watched it for a moment. The elevator arrived. The doors opened. She stepped in. She was not the cleaning lady anymore. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that ability is real and that the truth has a way of surfacing no matter how long it takes, please like this video right now, leave a comment below telling us what part hit you hardest, and subscribe to True Spark Stories so you never miss a story like Maya's. We'll see you in the next one.